Hi all, let's look at the critical tie-break game of my good friend Natalia Pogonina. So this was against Zhao Xue, 2-5-2-7, so slightly higher rated than Natalia, who's 2-4-5-6. Now this is a tie-break game, so the time limit I believe is something like 25 minutes with 10 seconds increments per move. And Zhao Xue starts with d4. Natalia repeats actually the very exciting Benko Gambit, b5. So it's taken, a6, and white takes, again being of course a pawn up, but it's an interesting gambit, very exciting. Of all gambits, it's actually one of the most respectable in chess. It's held its reputation throughout time as being one of the most respected, giving black long-term positional compensation and pressure. g6, black is in no rush here to take on a6. That's one little nuance here, that g6 is actually the most popular move. Knight c3. Now here often taking is popular, but bishop g7 was played. g3. Bishop takes a6 is popular in this position, but Natalia just castled. Bishop g2. d6. Knight f3, and now here the most usual move is taking the pawn with the bishop, but slightly rarer, knight takes a6, very interesting. Natalia is repeating this use of knight takes a6. Quite often the knight wants to connect with the e5 square, so I guess that's why bishop takes a6 is more popular in general in this position, to play bishop takes a6. There's over 500 games in line book like this where you see that black's pieces seem quite coordinated and the knights are both looking at e5. So this is a very interesting plan to actually take with the knight here. Knight takes a6, very interesting kind of novel plan. White castles, queen b6, then the knight comes to c7, but there's another interesting idea. Instead of the e5 square, the d4 square with knight b5 to d4 is an interesting plan. For the moment, knight c4, the knight's coming to an important strategic square. For the moment, black's structure is solid. It's not like the Benoni. The pawn is actually still held by the e7 pawn here. So queen b4, knight e3, bishop a6, and black's pieces seem quite active. Now in rapid chess this is actually more important to have active pieces and initiative and to be able to set the opponent problems, simply because it's kind of time consuming to have to play accurately in a defensive role. It's easier sometimes for the attacker to find attacking moves and try and exploit things like king safety and greater piece pressure. So if it's consuming time for the player having to defend, that can really lead to bad time pressure blunders later in this format. So we see rook b1, knight b5. The knight is actually immediately threatening knight takes c3 because of that pin, but also strategically to come to d4. We see bishop d2, and now knight d4, not fearing any discovery on the queen here. These always have to be carefully calculated actually. So for the moment though, it seems safe enough. White played rook e1. If white tries to exploit the queen with knight e4, this doesn't really do much. In fact, knight takes e2 is good for black here. So taking, black's ending up just material up after bishop takes f1 with the bishop hanging here. So there's no exploitation of the queen right now. So rook e1, and now again leaving that for the moment, rook fb8, b3, knight b7. Now some manoeuvring. Queen c1. The queen drops back now. Knight c4. So it seems as though white has a pleasant enough position, still a pawn up, but let's see, knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, e3. So white is trying to evict these pieces, take them out of the central squares. Knight drops back. Some weaknesses are being created though. That diagonal is a bit softer than before. Knight d1. Now here actually there's a very tactical move that was available to black in this position, which actually shows a bit the dynamism of the position. Remember, it's only a rapid game, so the players can't expect it to find the most scientific move, correct move every time. Natalia retreated the bishop. It might be better, even though it might still give white a good game, to play this tactical move here, knight a3, so trying to win the exchange. And your point is, this is a subtle point, if queen takes, bishop d3, looking at the rook and the queen drops back, this is virtually forced. Rook takes a2, and it seems difficult for white to defend this position without losing material back, because rook c2 is now threatened, winning material, and it's difficult to see what white's doing here. For example, like this, taking there and taking on b2. Also bishop c3, there's taking, and then rook c2. So it seems that that was technically a strong move, knight a3. It shows the dynamic play that black already has available. But okay, bishop g7, and now white actually covers more things with a4. So this rook's no longer eyeing the a3 square, it's shielded now, so there's no knight a3, so the knight actually retreats back. But there's some weakness provocation going on here. One thing about Benko Gambit, this pawn's a long way from being useful as a passed pawn. Black for the moment's got a lot of queenside pressure, and in fact black's most advanced pawn, most aggressive pawn, can actually be used at the right time to inflict a strategic break with c4, to try and break up white's pawns, try and maybe get something on the 7th rank. And it's very, very interesting, this game, from the perspective of the timing and preparation of playing c4. One thing actually is, for example, if you get a rook to the 7th, it's nicer if this pawn has moved, say, to f3, and it's very, very interesting that Natalia's manoeuvring provokes e4 and f3, which is actually very beneficial indirectly for c4 to break through to the 7th rank to look at white's king. Now let's have a look at this in action. So we want this kind of provocation, because essentially black is a pawn down, so you want to emphasize king safety, but the only way to get to the king is via the queen side in principle. So if we can get these pawns moving in principle, it would make c4 more effective to break through to the 7th rank. Let's see what happens. Bishop c3, bishop takes c3, knight takes, bishop d3, rook b2. Now here queen b4, starting to put the pressure on, rook d1, bishop a6, and it looks already as though c4 is kind of tempting, but it's held off for a moment. Black builds up behind the idea of playing c4 by playing rook a7. Now knight a2, the queen goes to a3, queen c2, and the rook's double. So now here black is directly threatening. Rook takes b3, the knight protects, queen b4. Again, c4 looks very, very interesting here. In fact, after rook a2, it seems so tempting to play c4, but Natalia didn't play this. Queen a5, trying to improve the configuration slightly. Queen d1, rook b4, and it looks as though c4 is even more effective now, because there'll be immediate pressure on a4 after taking here. There's pressure also on d5, h4, h5, stopping any kingside action for the moment. King h2. Now again, it's just so tempting in this position to play c4 just to try and break through on the b file, but really this queenside, leveraging the queenside for a kingside attack, would really be helped by white playing f3. And we see now a fantastic manoeuvring idea, knight e8, to try and bear some pressure down on d5, and also knight g4 will be useful here in light of the king on h2. e4, so finally white commits to e4 to try and reinforce things, and after knight f6 we get this move f3, and suddenly that row that I've been mentioning earlier is weakened with this maneuver. Black's pieces in ideal spots for this c4, for the second row to be more sensitive now. It's just increased the effectiveness of the c4 break, this knight maneuver, and now it's here that it's played, and this is unbelievably good timing from Natalia to prepare like this all the pieces for now c4 to be effective. So c4, breaking open the position, b takes, bishop takes c4, so black is breaking through to that second rank. Rook a1, trying to hold on to the a4 pawn here, rook c2, maybe just rook takes a4 is playable. So white's clinging on to a4, but black has got access to a second rank which has been weakened by the insertion of that f3. So rook b2 is already potentially pinning this bishop if the rook wasn't in the way. In this position, by the way, the engines suggest that maybe rook b2 can be made more effective again with another knight maneuver, knight d7 to e5, incredibly. So yeah, this idea of adding more effectiveness to invasions with the rooks is very, very interesting in relation to knight maneuvers. But rook b2 was played here, and white took on b2, which might not have been the best. It unleashes that pin immediately on the bishop. So this is immediate consequences now are felt. In fact, white probably did best to try and keep solid here by playing rook c2 to avoid that staring pin on the second rank. And for example, this position might have been better than the game. But we get here quite an abrupt ending. Now, rook takes b2, where black is just winning. After rook takes b2, we have this very nasty pin. So white wants to evict the rook and plays what seems to be a natural move to try and evict it, queen d4 in this position. Queen d4. Perhaps better is knight d3, but then actually rook d1 is still, this is actually forcibly winning material. After this, bishop takes, rook d1 trying to exploit the pin here, but rook takes g2, queen a6, black would have the bishop and knight against rook. So it's already very difficult. Anyway, after queen d4, we have rook c2, and now black has got huge pressure here in this position. If the knight moves, for example, interrupting queen's control of d2, then we can just pounce in with queen d2, double attacking. Horrible. So white's in a bad spot here. White tries to keep control of that d2 square. She plays queen e3. But then we have queen b4, and suddenly there's an idea of queen b2 and rook g2, and we see this is a loose rook. And in fact, white goes down here in this position, but it seems to be quite crushing now. This knight is in a very, very bad state on the back row. This bishop's very, very passive. All of black's pieces are kind of inside white's position. This poor pawn, the promise of white's position, is a long way from queening indeed. It's a Benko Gambit dream, this position, with the lateral pressure on the 7th rank. But a key bit of knight manoeuvring, remember, inflicted this f3 on white, waited for white to inflict the second rank weakness. And now after knight d3, we see that slight weakness of the second rank being used to win material. Bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, and now can you guess what black played here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now. Okay, not queen b2, there might be rook g1 holding up things. No, rook takes g2, a slight upgrade on that, running with check, and this wins material, queen b2 check. So you'll note that second rank, massively significant in winning this game here, getting a winning position here. It's just a piece up. The game continued a few more moves, but it's really over now. And here white resigned. So putting Natalia in a very good position to win the tie breaks there against Zhao Xue. So I think a key thing about this game is when you play the Benko Gambit and you want the queenside pressure, you must think, well, the queenside pressure is not for its own sake, it's to try and get to white's king. So a few more knight maneuvers to try and provoke some second rank weakness is something to bear in mind before you break open the position with c4. It's something to bear in mind. I think this game is a striking example of great timing before the c4 break. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.